I always thought I'd remember my best Christmas by the way the living room looked, or the smell of cookies coming out of the oven, or maybe by the way I felt waking up on Christmas morning, hopeful, a little nervous, but mostly content. This year, though, I remember the cold air that bit through my jacket as I carried 2 oversized bags of presents up my parents' walkway, and the way the Christmas lights blinked cheerfully above the porch, completely indifferent to the chill settling in my bones. Most years, I scrambled until the last possible moment, wrapping paper scattered, half-finished cards, the sinking worry that I'd forgotten someone. But not this time. I'd finished my work assignments by Thanksgiving, budgeted ahead, wrapped everything by December 1st. My little apartment in Portland, usually chaotic, had felt almost serene with stacks of brightly wrapped gifts neatly labeled for everyone: Mom, Dad, Jacob, Linda, their kids, even a few just-in-case boxes for whoever might show up. For the first time in my adult life, I felt ready. I'd even splurged on ribbon that matched the paper, tiny wooden ornaments tied to each tag. I tried to steady the bags on my knee as I knocked, feeling a small flicker of pride for getting it right, for once. The door swung open, letting out a brief waft of turkey and cinnamon. My mom stood there, her hand still on the handle, her face arranged in the polite smile she used for neighbors or package deliveries. I opened my mouth to say Merry Christmas, but she didn't step aside. "We don't want you here this year, Emily," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, practiced. The words landed with a strange flatness. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "Wait, what?" I tried to keep my tone light, almost playful, as if this might be a poorly timed joke. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my dad behind her in the hallway, pretending to study a framed family photo, his body stiff as if he'd rehearsed how to look busy. Before my mom could say anything else, Jacob's voice cut through from behind her, louder, sharper, certain. "This isn't a place for losers," he said, leaning against the doorway with that half-smile he used to wear when he'd beaten me at board games as a kid. My grip tightened on the bags. Linda was visible just past Jacob's shoulder, sitting on the far edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly together in her lap. She didn't look up. The silence stretched, the only sound the shuffling of wrapping paper as I adjusted my hold. I could feel the chill of the December evening pressing in behind me. I looked from Jacob's smug face to my mother's worried one, then to my father, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. "Okay," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "If that's how it is." I set the bags down, careful not to let them topple, and turned back toward the driveway. It was a short walk, but it felt like an eternity. I could feel my face burning, not from anger but from a kind of bewildered shame. I climbed into the car, the silence inside swallowing the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking dishes from the house behind me. The seats beside me were piled high with gifts, each tag handwritten, each box chosen carefully after months of planning. I ran my finger along the edge of one ribbon, remembering how proud I'd felt seeing them all lined up on my apartment floor. I sat for a long while, my hands frozen on the steering wheel. The world outside was painted in the soft blue of twilight, snowflakes began to drift down, landing on the windshield and melting away almost instantly. It felt like the universe was trying to wipe the whole scene clean before it could settle. I tried to piece together how we'd gotten here. Every year, it seemed I gave a little more, money, time, energy, thinking that eventually, it would all come back to me in the form of belonging. I remembered staying up late to finish freelance projects so I could afford the summer camp fees Jacob asked for, skipping dinners out so the kids would have nice presents. I remembered my mother telling me, "Family helps family, honey," and my dad quietly thanking me with a nod and a squeeze on the shoulder. But now, it seemed all that counted for nothing, one missed gesture, and suddenly I was out. The longer I sat, the less sense it made. The house glowed softly behind me. I could see the shadow of the Christmas tree in the window, the faint outline of stockings on the mantel. For years, I'd imagined that if I just tried hard enough, I'd always have a place here. But maybe that had never really been true. Maybe I'd just been too busy making everything perfect to notice how little anyone else was trying. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and let out a long breath. The warmth from the vents had faded, leaving the air inside sharp and dry. I glanced again at the bags in the passenger seat, gifts no one would open, care packages for a family that, tonight, didn't want me. I slid the key into the ignition, pausing as the dashboard flickered to life. For a moment, I wondered if I should just drive, leave the presents on the curb, erase myself from the picture, start fresh somewhere no one knew my name. But I stayed there, staring through the windshield at the snow, caught between habit and hope, the engine humming softly beneath my hands. Sometimes, you don't notice the line between family and obligation until you're standing outside in the cold, holding everything you thought would make you belong. I don't remember making the decision to walk back in. Maybe I'd left something behind, dignity, perhaps, or some final hope that someone would open the door and pull me back in with a hug and a nervous laugh, calling it all a misunderstanding. But as I reached the porch again, the voices inside had already shifted into a softer register, muffled by the glass. I pressed the doorbell, and for a moment, nobody moved. This time, when the door opened, it wasn't Mom's face I saw first but the familiar burst of warmth and spice. Cinnamon, turkey, and the pine from a plastic garland twisted above the hallway mirror, holiday scents that should have meant home. But the air felt heavy, and even the string of blinking lights over the entryway seemed to flicker less cheerfully than before. Mom stood there, one hand curled around a ceramic cup. Her knuckles had gone white from the pressure. The smile she offered now was smaller, pinched at the corners, and she didn't step aside. For a moment, I saw myself reflected in her glasses, just a guest on the wrong side of the door. "I just want to know," I said, quietly. "Why am I not welcome? What did I do?" Behind her, the living room was a Christmas magazine, stockings, a glowing tree, platters of deviled eggs and mashed potatoes. Jacob lounged on the arm of the couch, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even bother to look up at me, but his voice cut across the silence. "Honestly, Em, you've been slacking. The kids barely got anything from you this year. It's embarrassing for us." Linda sat stiffly in the corner, hands knotted together, shoulders hunched as if she might fold herself into the upholstery. She kept her eyes on the floor, not daring to meet mine. Dad stood by the window, fingers toying with the cord on the blinds. He didn't turn around. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a blend of anger and something closer to shame. "What are you talking about?" My voice shook just enough to give me away. "I spent weeks getting things together. There are more presents in the car for your kids than anyone else's." Jacob gave a short, sharp laugh and finally glanced up. "Last year, you did more. This year, it's like you don't care." He shrugged, spreading his arms as if it all made perfect sense. Mom cleared her throat, her cup rattling gently against the saucer. "But you bought a new car, Emily. You found money for that." The sentence landed between us like a challenge and an accusation, both too soft and too sharp. For a second, I just stared at her, waiting for a punchline that never came. "The car's on credit, Mom. My old one was dying, and I need it for work." I paused, trying to keep my tone measured. "And even if I'd paid cash, how does buying a car make me responsible for Jacob's kids?" Jacob rolled his eyes and glanced at Dad, who still hadn't said a word. "You're the one with the money, Em. We're a family. Families help each other. You've always done that." I looked around, searching for an ally, a glance from Dad, a reassuring word from Mom, even a kind nod from Linda. But Dad's gaze never left the window. Mom's fingers only tightened around her cup, and Linda looked like she might cry, but she said nothing. The silence pressed in, making every sound, a distant timer beeping in the kitchen, a dog barking outside, seem suddenly loud. I realized then that it wasn't anger or disappointment keeping everyone quiet. It was something older and heavier, habit, perhaps, or the deep rut of roles we'd been playing since childhood. Mom kept the peace, Dad kept quiet, Jacob called the shots, and Linda disappeared into herself. I just filled the gaps with effort and money. My heart pounded in my chest, but my words came out steady. Is that your reasoning? Because I was generous in the past, I'm now obligated to keep doing it forever? And if I don't, I'm a loser? Jacob shrugged again, grinning this time. If the shoe fits. I felt the weight of the house, every picture on the wall, every Christmas card taped to the fridge, every memory of happier years, resting squarely on my shoulders. My mother's mouth pressed into a thin line, and for a second, I thought she might speak. Instead, she just sipped her tea, eyes fixed on a point above my head. Linda shifted on the couch, and in that tiny movement, I saw all the things left unsaid, the silent pleas, the bottled-up apologies, the years of choosing quiet over confrontation. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to comfort her, to sit beside her and take her hand like we used to do when we were both new to the family. But today, the space between us was too wide. I let out a slow breath. Then enjoy Christmas without me. My voice was almost gentle. I set the gifts down just inside the door, careful not to disturb the perfectly wrapped bows. They looked oddly out of place, like someone else's memories. Nobody moved. I stepped back onto the porch, the cold air hitting my cheeks with a sting that felt oddly clarifying. As I walked down the path, I saw my reflection again in the frosted window, a woman carrying nothing but her own weight. Back in the car, I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I sat for a moment, watching my breath cloud the air, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and forks against plates drifting through the door I'd just left. I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing some invisible standard. If I could just give enough, be generous enough, work hard enough, maybe I'd finally earn my spot at the table. But maybe that seat was never really mine to claim. Maybe I'd been offering love in a currency no one else was willing to spend. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay in bed long after the city outside had quieted, my thoughts cycling through every word, every gesture, every glance exchanged and avoided in my parents' living room. I replayed the scene at the door, the gifts, Jacob's voice, Mom's trembling hands, like a short film I couldn't turn off. I kept searching for a missed clue, a single moment when things could have gone differently. But all I found was the persistent ache behind my eyes and the slow crawl of regret. Eventually, I gave up trying to rest and moved to my tiny home office, flicking on the desk lamp and watching the rain trace lazy lines down the window. The apartment felt smaller than usual, as if the walls had closed in since Christmas Eve. I reached for my laptop, fingers automatically opening my inbox out of habit, the blue glow of the screen painting strange shadows across the bookshelves. A half-finished cup of coffee sat beside my keyboard, cold now, but I sipped it anyway. I thought about what Jacob said, how I'd been slacking this year, as though all those previous years had vanished into thin air. My brain, restless and stubborn, decided to prove him wrong. So I began the quiet, methodical work of digging through my financial history. If I couldn't sleep, I could at least have the numbers on my side. I searched for every Venmo and PayPal transfer, every email about just covering a little extra rent, every text that began with Emily, "Can I ask a favor?" There were more than I expected. The digital paper trail stretched back years, birthday gifts, summer camp registrations, urgent requests for help with daycare. There were requests that came with apologies, and then, slowly, ones that simply arrived without explanation, as if my yes was a given. I opened a spreadsheet and began to tally them: $200 here, $400 there, $75 for a forgotten soccer uniform, $300 for an emergency dental visit, $1,200 to catch up on the mortgage one spring when Jacob was between jobs. The numbers swelled as I scrolled through the past 5 years. It wasn't just money I'd given. It was hours, late nights hustling to finish freelance projects, weekends spent at my desk so the transfer would land in Jacob's account before Monday's bill was due. As I worked, I found myself surrounded by tiny artifacts of my double life: invoices for logo designs and branding packages, client thank you notes, color swatches for bakery menus. Wedged between them were receipts for children's toys, e-gift cards for Linda's birthday, a scanned copy of a check I'd sent for the kids' winter coats. My world had been divided, one half working for my future, the other keeping theirs afloat. During the worst of the pandemic, I'd rationed groceries, skipping out on takeout or little treats so there would always be enough left for just in case. I'd told myself I was being practical, that families pull together in hard times. But somewhere along the way, the line blurred. What began as support had turned into expectation, and then into obligation. The boundaries I thought I'd kept became invisible, erased by every just this once that became just one more. At one point, I stumbled across an old note from Linda, just a thank you for a gift card the year the youngest was born. I read her words, soft and grateful, and felt something twist inside me. I remembered how I'd felt then, needed, important, even loved. That feeling had faded as the years went on, replaced by the cool certainty of being taken for granted. I watched as the spreadsheet grew, row after row, hundreds, then thousands of dollars. My hands trembled slightly on the keys, but I kept going, documenting each transfer as if I could somehow order the chaos of the past with numbers and dates. It was almost funny, in a way, all those carefully selected birthday presents, the balloons and party hats and bakery cupcakes for kids I loved but hardly saw, sitting side by side with digital invoices for companies whose logos I'd never see in person. The contrast struck me: the bright, silly images from the kids' birthdays, scanned invitations decorated with dinosaurs or fairy princesses, next to the cold, calculated columns of my bank statements. Two worlds that never really touched, except through me. When I finally finished, the sum stared back at me, far more than I would have guessed, a number that made my chest tighten with disbelief. I wondered how much of my life I'd quietly handed away, hoping to be noticed, hoping to be good enough. As dawn started to lighten the sky beyond the rain-soaked glass, I pulled up my bank's website and scrolled to the list of scheduled payments. There, set for the 15th of every month, was the familiar auto payment to Jacob's checking account. It was just a small amount now, a habit more than a necessity, but suddenly it felt enormous, a symbol of all the ways I'd let myself be needed, then used, and then ignored. With a few clicks, I canceled it. A notification appeared: "Are you sure you want to delete this scheduled payment?" I clicked yes, feeling an odd mix of freedom and guilt. There was no rush of triumph, only the slow, cold realization that what I'd lost was something I'd never really had, a sense of safety, of family, that didn't come with a price tag. My phone buzzed on the desk, startling me from my thoughts. Jacob's name lit up the screen, the words simple: "Call me. We need to talk." I stared at it, waiting for anger or sadness or some final ache. Instead, I felt nothing but exhaustion, as if my body had finally caught up with the years of carrying everyone else. I closed my laptop and watched the rain slide down the glass, washing away the traces of last night's snow. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, with enough time, I'd learn to keep what was mine and give only what I chose, not what was demanded. Sunday mornings had always been my sanctuary. I usually spent them in my favorite chair, the one with the threadbare arm, surrounded by the soft glow of a cloudy Portland sky and the gentle whir of my laptop fan. That day was no different, or at least it shouldn't have been. I was in the middle of sketching a logo for a new client, a little coffee shop down by Hawthorne, my mind blissfully far from family drama. I liked the quiet, the hum of possibility in every blank canvas. My only company was a half-finished mug of peppermint tea and the subtle sound of rain brushing the window. Then came the knock. At first, I thought it might be a package, maybe the set of watercolor markers I'd ordered as a small reward to myself for surviving the week. But when I glanced at the door, my stomach dropped. I recognized the shape behind the frosted glass, broad shoulders, slightly slouched posture, a presence too familiar to mistake. Jacob. I hesitated, one hand hovering over my trackpad, then clicked to turn off the screen. I told myself it was about privacy, but it felt like more than that, a line I needed to draw. I rose and opened the door, meeting his eyes with a calm I didn't fully feel. He breezed in as if nothing had happened just days earlier, when he'd watched me leave our parents' house empty-handed. He wore the same battered green jacket from high school, the one Linda had tried to throw out a dozen times. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Instead, he dropped onto my couch, took in the cluttered table, the laptop, the remains of my breakfast. "Linda's losing it," he said without looking at me. "The kids are driving her nuts. We've barely got enough to cover groceries this week. Everything's falling apart." I didn't move from the doorway. I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. He filled it, as always. "She keeps saying she's tired, that I should be doing more, but what does she expect?" My hours got cut again. "She's always stressed, Emily. The kids are getting older, there's more expenses, you know?" His voice, once sharp and teasing, sounded practiced now, as if he'd been rehearsing these lines all morning. I sat down across from him, arms folded, legs tucked under myself, giving no ground. "What do you want, Jacob?" He finally looked at me, eyes narrowing. "I need your help." Like before. There was no preamble, no softening. He made it sound like an appointment, a simple transaction. The ask was familiar, even comforting in a twisted way. He expected me to step up, like always. There was a time when I might have. But I'd spent the night counting receipts, tallying up years of invisible labor. That tally rang in my ears, sharp as a bell. I shook my head. "I can't do that anymore." He leaned forward, voice dropping into a plea. "Come on, Em. You know how it is. Family helps family. That's what you always said. The kids need you. Linda needs you. I need you." The weight of his words pressed down on me. For a moment, I thought of all the Christmas mornings, the birthday parties, the late-night phone calls where I'd said yes before he even finished asking. But this time, the answer felt different, less about him, more about me. "I've done what I could," I replied. "But I'm not your safety net anymore." His jaw tightened. "So you're just going to let us drown?" I let the accusation sit in the air. I knew what he was trying to do, he was good at it. He wanted me to feel responsible, to carry the guilt for a boat he'd never bothered to row. I spoke quietly, but firmly. "You're a grown man, Jacob. Be one." His expression flickered, something ugly passing over it. "Wow. That's cold, Em. You've always been the one I could count on. You think you're better than the rest of us now, just because you're not married, no kids, a little money saved up?" That stung in a way I didn't want to admit. I felt the urge to defend my choices, to explain the long nights, the anxiety, the empty holidays spent working so I could afford to say yes every time he called. But I swallowed it. I wouldn't let him turn this back on me. He kept going, his voice rising. You know, Linda always says you're so generous, but I think you just like feeling needed. Makes you feel important, right? I met his gaze. No, Jacob. It made me feel like family. But family shouldn't come with conditions. He stood, pacing now, hands jammed in his pockets. So what, you're cutting us off? Just like that? I nodded. I have to. For me. He stopped, studying me as if seeing me for the first time. You'll regret this, Em. You think you're tough, but you need us more than we need you. I watched him, waiting for some sign of remorse, a sliver of the brother I used to trust. But there was nothing, only the old defensiveness, the expectation that I would bend. The silence that settled then was different from the quiet of my Sunday mornings. It wasn't peaceful. It was raw, unresolved, but it was mine. I felt my own boundaries solidify, a new architecture rising in the space between us. Jacob turned, pausing at the door. He didn't say goodbye. Just, you'll regret this, tossed over his shoulder like a final warning. I listened to the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall, the heavy click of the apartment door. I let myself breathe, the air tasting strange, sharp, like the first day of a new season. I sat for a long moment in the hush he left behind, my laptop still dark, my heart unexpectedly steady. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, unsettled, but not threatening. For the first time in a long while, I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation for the life I chose to build. Sometimes, drawing a line is the only way to find your way back to yourself. Evenings were my time to settle my thoughts, to untangle the day's knots over a cup of chamomile and the gentle rattle of the heating pipes. That particular evening, I was grateful for the routine, my favorite mug, the lamp by the window turned low, a book balanced in my lap more for comfort than reading. I had almost convinced myself the world outside was distant, that family drama belonged to a different, less cozy universe. Then my phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, no name, no city. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something in me, some old habit of bracing for the next ask, made me swipe to answer. Is this Emily Harper? The voice was calm, male, with that careful politeness that lawyers or debt collectors use. Yes, this is Emily, I replied, careful, my heart beating a little faster. He cleared his throat. My name is Mark Dawson. I'm calling on behalf of a client regarding a financial matter. Would you have a moment to speak? My first thought, embarrassingly, was that this was about my car. I'd made every payment on time, but the word financial can make your pulse trip no matter how carefully you've managed things. Is this about a bill? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. No, nothing of the sort, he said, his voice steady but distant, as if reading from a script. I represent someone connected to your brother Jacob. I'm afraid I can't disclose further details over the phone, but my client would like to discuss some concerns regarding financial transactions and personal support rendered in the past few years. I shifted in my chair, setting my tea down. I'm not sure I understand. Is Jacob in some kind of trouble? He paused just long enough to make me uneasy. That's not something I can confirm or deny at this time. What I can say is that my client wants you to be fully informed, and believes a face-to-face meeting would be most appropriate. Would you be willing to meet with me? I can make myself available at your convenience, and I assure you, this is not a collection matter. The way he said not a collection matter was almost reassuring, and yet my mind jumped to every possible disaster, identity theft, unpaid taxes, some overlooked bill that would tumble my carefully stacked life. But there was something else in his voice, a hint of empathy, maybe even concern. I wondered who could have sent him. Linda? No, she wouldn't involve a lawyer, would she? Not Jacob, unless he wanted to make a scene. Can you give me any details at all? I asked, trying to keep my own voice steady. I wish I could, he said. But for privacy and legal reasons, I need to keep the specifics confidential until we meet. If it helps, you are not in trouble. My client simply wants to share some information with you, something they feel you need to know, given your financial involvement with Jacob over the years. There it was again, the reminder that my private generosity, my attempts to keep things running smoothly, had left a trail visible to strangers. I felt a rush of embarrassment, then frustration at myself for feeling embarrassed. I hadn't done anything wrong. But it was disorienting, the way private acts become public in a heartbeat. Okay, I finally said, after another moment of silence. When and where? Mark sounded relieved. I can see you tomorrow, if that works. I'm based in downtown, but I'm happy to meet you at a neutral location, a coffee shop, my office, wherever you feel most comfortable. Just let me know. Let's do your office, I said. If this was going to be official, I might as well meet it on its own turf. He agreed, giving me the address and promising a follow-up email with the details. He finished by assuring me again, this is about getting you the information you deserve, Ms. Harper. My client is not seeking compensation or legal action. Only understanding. After we hung up, I sat in the glow of the lamp, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. My tea had gone cold, the book on my lap forgotten. I tried to imagine who would want to share information with me about Jacob, and what sort of truth needed a lawyer as its messenger. I replayed Jacob's last words, the warning he'd flung at me on my own threshold, "You'll regret this." At the time, I dismissed it as just another attempt to push my buttons. Now I wondered if it was more than anger, if it was desperation. I thought about Linda, silent and tense on the edge of the couch at Christmas, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I remembered the guilt in her eyes, the way she couldn't quite look at me. For the first time, I considered that maybe she was carrying a burden I couldn't see. Maybe she'd reached out for help and, finding none at home, had gone to someone who could make things official. The apartment felt different now, less like a refuge, more like a holding pen for old secrets. I glanced at my laptop, thought about opening old emails, but decided against it. Tonight, I was done searching the past for explanations. Whatever was coming next, I'd face it in daylight. I picked up my phone, scrolling to Mark's number, and typed, "Send me the address." "I'll be there." The reply came almost instantly. "Confirmed. See you at 10 a.m. My assistant will greet you at the front desk." I set the phone down and sat for a while, the tension low and quiet, like the buzz of distant power lines. I wasn't afraid, exactly. More curious than anything, and just a little tired. Still, I knew this was the start of something I couldn't ignore, another boundary being drawn, but this time not by me. Linda was always the quiet one, the sort of person who let conversation swirl around her and only spoke when she had something worth saying. For years, I'd taken her silence at face value, interpreting it as indifference, or at best, resignation. But that morning, sitting in Mark Dawson's office with its soothing taupe walls and tastefully minimalist furniture, I realized I'd been wrong. Linda hadn't been ignoring the cracks in her family. She'd been studying them, documenting every fault line with the quiet attention of someone waiting for the right moment to act. The waiting area was hushed, all gentle music and filtered sunlight. Mark's assistant greeted me with a smile, then led me through glass doors to a small conference room. The table was bare except for a folder, my name neatly printed on the label. Mark sat across from me, composed, his hands folded atop a yellow legal pad. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Harper," he began, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "I know this is a lot, but I want you to understand that my client's only concern is your awareness and safety." I nodded, feeling my nerves tangle. "You said this was about Jacob." "About money?" Mark opened the folder and slid it toward me. "My client is Linda Harper. She discovered some information that she believes you need to see." Inside, a series of documents, bank statements, transfer receipts, printouts of emails and text messages. At first, I tried to make sense of the chaos, line after line of numbers, names, dates. There were my own transfers, the monthly ones and the desperate one-offs, rent for July, daycare, urgent, kids' school trip. Next to them, withdrawals from Jacob's account, some for the exact amount I'd sent, some for more. I flipped to the next page. There, highlighted in yellow, were transfers into a second account, one I didn't recognize, under Jacob's name alone. Linda had written brief notes in the margins, careful and methodical, unexplained, not shared with me, after Emily's deposit. Mark spoke softly, giving me space. "Linda only discovered this second account recently. She'd suspected something for a while, Jacob being evasive about bills, money not stretching as far as it should. She found a bank statement he left out, and started connecting the dots. That's when she contacted me. As I traced the lines from my deposits to the hidden withdrawals, something cold settled in my chest. So the money I gave, it never went to the kids?" Mark shook his head. "Linda found substantial evidence that Jacob was diverting funds, most of which were spent on gambling sites, bars, hotels. Not on the family." I scanned the transaction history, a sick sort of familiarity growing with every highlighted entry: sports betting apps, online casinos, dinners at places Linda couldn't have possibly afforded. There was a string of Amazon purchases, gift cards that never seemed to materialize. The sum of it all was staggering. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The air in the office felt thinner, as if I'd climbed a mountain without realizing it. "She's known about this for how long?" "A few months." She wanted to be certain before saying anything. She was scared of what would happen to her, to the kids, if Jacob found out she was looking. A wave of memories crashed over me: Linda's downcast eyes at Christmas, her hands white-knuckled on her mug, the way she never argued with Jacob. I'd always thought she was complicit, or at least indifferent, but now it was clear, she was surviving. I swallowed hard. "So what does she want from me?" Mark offered a faint, understanding smile. "Support. If she decides to leave, she'll need somewhere safe to go, at least until she can figure out next steps for herself and the kids. She knows Jacob will fight, and she's afraid of what he might do, not violence, but financial retaliation. She asked me to tell you she doesn't expect anything, but if you can help, she'd be grateful." I stared down at Linda's careful handwriting, the neat columns of figures. In that moment, anger warred with a sharper clarity. For years, I'd been the family ATM, not because they needed me, but because Jacob knew how to play the system. But Linda? She'd been keeping score for her own reasons. Not greed, not resentment, but a simple, stubborn hope that things could get better. I breathed in, steadying myself. "Tell her I'm in. Whatever she needs, I'll do it." Mark nodded, closing the folder and tucking it under his arm. "Thank you, Ms. Harper. I'll let her know. She's planning to leave, very soon. She's just waiting for the right moment." For the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of relief. The secrets were out now, no longer festering in the dark. Linda's silence had been the sound of gathering courage, not apathy. And for me, the lines had finally been drawn, not between giving and receiving, but between enabling and truly helping. Mark walked me to the door, his voice gentle. "If you need anything, call me directly. We'll keep you updated as things progress." Out in the hall, I paused, running my fingers over the phone in my pocket. A message from Linda blinked onto the screen, just a simple thank you, no details, no apology. It meant more than any explanation. That evening, I sat by my window and watched the winter sky grow dark. I thought about all the times I'd mistaken quiet for consent, when all along it had been the opposite, a quiet resistance, a waiting for the right moment. It struck me then that sometimes survival looks a lot like silence. Clarity didn't come with fireworks. It came with stillness, a calm so deep I almost missed it, but in that space, I found something new, the resolve to stand with someone, instead of just standing by. There's a moment when tiredness becomes something else, when the lines on a person's face shift from exhaustion to resolve. I saw it in Linda that afternoon as we sat across from each other in the corner booth at June and Maple, a small Portland cafe whose brunch menu I designed 2 years ago. The walls were still hung with the same soft watercolor prints, the scent of toasted rye and coffee as familiar as ever. But everything else felt changed. Linda stirred her tea, fingers trembling slightly, eyes rimmed red but clear. She looked out the window as if studying the clouds for permission to speak. I remembered how she used to flinch at raised voices, how, at every family gathering, she'd sit quietly, shoulders tensed, waiting for the next sharp word from Jacob. Now, her silence was different. It wasn't fear. It was a steady kind of quiet, the kind you earn after years of waiting for someone else to change. I let her have the silence, sipping my own coffee, watching the streetcars pass outside. We'd exchanged small talk, work, the kids, her new obsession with indoor plants. But I could sense the real reason for our meeting, pulsing under every word. Finally, she spoke. "Jacob's supposed to leave for a conference next week. 4 days, maybe 5. I've already checked, he's booked the ticket." She said it without emotion, just a fact to be catalogued. I nodded, keeping my tone gentle. "And you're leaving while he's gone?" Linda nodded. She slid a printout across the table, listing photos of a modest apartment in Fort Collins, Colorado. "A friend from college lives there. She knows a landlord, got me a deal. I can put down the deposit this week, but I'll need help with the moving van. I've never done this before. Not like this." The admission hung between us. I thought about all the times she'd organized bake sales, birthday parties, classroom fundraisers, always the invisible engine behind other people's happiness. But this was different. This was her own life, her own leap. I reached for her hand, not to guide her but to steady the trembling. "I can help. But I want to be clear, Linda, this is your move. I'll do what you need, but you have to decide how it goes. I'm not stepping in to run things for you. I'm just here so you're not alone." Her fingers closed around mine, grip stronger than I expected. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Thank you for not asking why it took so long." I squeezed her hand in return, feeling the ache of all the wasted years, the silence at Christmas, the apology in her posture, the hundreds of small wounds we'd both ignored. I realized then that support isn't always about taking the lead. Sometimes it's about walking beside someone, letting them know their voice is enough. Linda outlined her plan, voice low. She'd pack the essentials with the kids after school, just clothes, favorite books, the old stuffed rabbit her youngest still clung to at night. Everything else could be left behind. She'd drive the rental van herself, taking the kids first to a hotel in Vancouver for one night before heading east. "If he calls, don't tell him anything," she said. "He'll try to guilt you, maybe threaten legal stuff. But I can handle that now." I nodded. "Whatever you need. I'll cover the deposit and the van. Text me the details." She exhaled, a shaky sound, half relief, half fear. "He's going to blame you. No matter what I say, he'll say you put me up to it." I shrugged. "He can think what he wants. I'm done letting his story be the only one anyone hears." Linda managed a watery smile. "The boys made you drawings. They want to send them before we leave. Is that okay?" For the first time, I smiled too. "I'd love that." The waitress came by to refill our mugs. We both thanked her, the simple act of gratitude a quiet reminder of the world continuing beyond family drama. I noticed Linda's posture had shifted, no longer curled inward, but open, her shoulders set with new purpose. As we stood to leave, she hesitated, then hugged me tightly. "If it comes to it, will you answer if I call?" "Always," I promised, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Outside, the air was brisk and bright. We walked together to the corner, then parted ways, Linda heading for the bus, me toward my car, both of us carrying a new kind of hope. I realized as I watched her go that sometimes, leaving isn't about running away. It's about running toward something you finally believe you deserve. That evening, Linda texted a list of times and numbers, logistics for the move. I responded with the confirmation and transfer details. It felt strangely businesslike, yet sacred, two women orchestrating an exit not from danger, but from years of being overlooked. Lying in bed that night, I thought of Linda's certainty, the way she had finally claimed it as her own. I drifted off wondering how many women had waited for someone else to draw the map, only to discover they could chart their own course. And just before sleep claimed me, I remembered her last words in the cafe, "When he finds out, he's going to blame you." Maybe he would. Maybe the world would never see the full story behind the silence. But I'd finally learned that standing beside someone is sometimes braver than standing in front of them. The text arrived at 6:13 a.m., lighting my phone with a small pulse of blue in the pre-dawn dark. "We're leaving today." Nothing more. I blinked at it through sleep-blurred eyes, the world outside still silent and gray. For a long minute I just watched the words, feeling the immensity of the moment and the quiet, determined courage it took to type them. Then I tapped back, "Safe travels. Text when you're through the border." The day unfolded with a strange stillness, every routine action layered with anticipation. I moved through my apartment, refilling the kettle, opening curtains to the rainy Portland morning, checking my email as if nothing had shifted. But inside, I was wound tight. At mid-morning, Linda's next message buzzed through, "On the road. Boys are excited. Thank you for everything." I replied with a string of hearts and a thumbs up, then opened my banking app and sent the second deposit. A few seconds later, she responded simply, "Got it. You're the best." There was nothing more for me to do but wait. I went about my day, the world around me humming with its usual business, a neighbor's dog barking, the sound of recycling bins dragged down the sidewalk, the low thrum of distant traffic. I spent a few hours sketching for a client, watching the raindrops bead and run down the window. But my thoughts kept circling back to Linda and the boys, somewhere on I-84, moving east toward Colorado and the possibility of something better. By afternoon, I found myself cleaning for no reason, wiping down counters, folding laundry, sorting through kitchen drawers. There's a particular quiet that settles after a major shift, a calm that isn't quite peace but isn't chaos either. It's the silence after a storm, when the air is new and the world waits to see what's changed. In the evening, unable to sit still, I decided to drive. I didn't have a destination in mind, but my car seemed to know. Before I realized it, I was winding through the old neighborhood toward Jacob and Linda's house. It was mostly out of habit, some old reflex from holidays past, when I'd load my trunk with gifts and casseroles, rehearsing small talk in my head. Tonight, I kept my headlights low as I turned onto their street. The house looked the same as ever, porch light glowing, a faded wreath still hanging on the door, one window lit up in the front room. But there was a hollowness, a sense of absence even from the outside. No shadows moved inside. No toys in the yard. It struck me that this was the first time I'd ever seen the place truly empty. For a moment, I remembered the dozens of times I'd crept up that walkway, arms full of carefully wrapped presents, anxious to be seen as the good sister, hoping that if I just brought enough, did enough, I'd finally be welcomed in for good. I remembered the way Linda would open the door, tired but grateful, ushering me into a swirl of wrapping paper and laughter. Even Jacob, in the early years, would manage a real smile. Now, the porch was just another stop on Linda's map, a place she'd crossed off in the pursuit of something safer. And Jacob, well, he was about to wake up to a house stripped of excuses and explanations. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat, watching the quiet street, feeling the weight of everything that had brought us here. Relief and tension mingled in my chest, a strange mixture of pride in Linda and guilt that I couldn't do more. I thought about the boys, about how their lives would be different by the time the sun rose tomorrow. About Linda, alone but not truly alone this time. She really did it, I whispered to myself, my voice barely more than a breath. It felt both like a victory and a beginning. The world outside was still, the only movement the flicker of porch lights and the slow drift of rain down the windshield. I turned the ignition, ready to drive away, but my phone lit up before I could pull out of the curb. The caller ID flashed Jacob's name. For a heartbeat, I considered letting it ring out. But I knew, whatever happened next, the story wouldn't be finished until I answered. I took a steadying breath and picked up, the calm of the evening settling heavy around me. Sometimes, escape isn't a sprint but a quiet, determined walk through the dark, carrying everything you need and leaving the rest behind. It started just after sunrise on Sunday, the day after Linda left. The rain tapped its quiet rhythm on my window, blurring the city into soft grays. I was in the kitchen, coffee brewing, hands wrapped around my favorite chipped mug, savoring the slow hush of a day with nothing to do. Then the phone buzzed, shattering the silence, a voicemail from Jacob. I didn't pick up when he called. I'd decided the night before that nothing he could say would change what had happened, and I didn't trust myself not to be pulled back into old patterns by the sound of his voice. But curiosity got the best of me. I let the coffee steep a minute longer, then pressed play. The message was 3 minutes of fury and accusation, so fast and raw it almost sounded rehearsed. You did this, Emily. You poisoned her. You made her leave me, and you took my family. There were tears in his voice, and rage, but underneath it all, something smaller, panic, maybe, or the realization that the game had changed. He called me selfish, cold, a backstabber. He begged, then threatened, then begged again. I listened once, letting every word fall like rain on a roof, loud at first, then fading as I realized how little weight they truly carried. I didn't cry, didn't clench my fists, didn't replay the tape to see if I could have done something different. I simply deleted it, watched the little icon disappear, and felt nothing but a faint ache, an old bruise I'd finally stopped pressing. A few minutes later, another message. Then another. Each one shorter, angrier, more desperate. You think you're better than me? You think you can just walk away? You have no idea what you've done. If you cared about this family, you'd pick up. There was a time when every vibration of my phone would have made me jump, my stomach tightening with dread. But now, Jacob's voice just sounded small. He had always thundered through my life, so sure of his power to shake the walls. Today, he was just a voice on a machine, echoing into empty space. I poured another cup of coffee, cracked the window to let in the scent of wet earth and pavement. The city was waking up, the rain easing to a drizzle. My phone buzzed again, a text this time. My lawyer's reaching out. No punctuation, no warmth. Just a threat, dressed as formality. I read it once, then set the phone face down on the counter. I realized, with a kind of gentle surprise, that I felt calm. Not triumphant, not angry, just free. The storm was still there, but I wasn't standing in it anymore. I could close the door, let it batter the windows if it wanted. I didn't have to open them. For years, I'd thought setting boundaries meant confrontation, fighting back, proving my side of the story, demanding to be heard. But there's a quiet power in simply walking away, in not answering the call, in choosing peace over the endless tug-of-war. I scrolled through my call history, thumb hovering over Jacob's name. With a single tap, I blocked his number. The screen flashed a polite confirmation: you will no longer receive calls, messages, or FaceTime from this contact. I breathed out, feeling the knot in my chest finally begin to loosen. Later that afternoon, while I was finishing a logo for a client, a cheerful sunflower for a bakery in the Pearl District, my laptop chimed. An email, subject line stark and businesslike, financial dispute review. The sender, a law office I didn't recognize, but the wording made it clear. Jacob's lawyer. For a moment, I let my hands rest on the keyboard. I thought about the path that had led me here, all the gifts, the money, the years of saying yes, the sudden, sharp break when I finally said no. I thought about Linda and the boys somewhere east, carving out a new life, the sound of their laughter no longer filtered through Jacob's anger. I thought about the silence I'd fought so hard to fill, and how it had finally become a space I could breathe in. I opened the email, reading the words without fear. There would be paperwork, calls, maybe more threats. But none of it would touch the quiet I'd built in this small apartment, or the peace I'd found in drawing my own lines. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let someone else's anger pass you by, untouched. Sometimes, you choose not to play the game at all. I'd always pictured confrontations as loud, explosive things, shouted words in parking lots or dramatic scenes in living rooms. But when the time finally came, it was quieter than I ever imagined. We met in a small meeting room at the public library, with blank beige walls and folding chairs that creaked under every movement. Neutral ground, by design. The kind of place where voices were meant to be kept low, where even anger had to be careful not to echo. Jacob was already there when I arrived, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched. He looked smaller somehow, as if the last week had hollowed out something inside him. The lights overhead hummed faintly. We were alone except for the sound of rain beating softly against the tall windows. He watched me cross the room, eyes wary, mouth tight. I pulled out the chair across from him but didn't sit yet. I could feel the energy radiating off him, something fierce and desperate, wound tight as a spring. "You happy now?" he began, voice low but sharp. "You broke up the family. The boys keep asking for their dad. Linda won't even answer my calls. You did this, Emily." His words might have gutted me once. But now, I just listened, letting them fall where they would. I didn't flinch or try to argue. There's a kind of strength in refusing to pick up a fight. "I needed to see you in person," he pressed. "To ask, how could you turn her against me? Against all of us?" I sat down, my hand steady as I opened my folder and slid it across the table. Transaction logs, printouts, receipts, each one a quiet witness to what had really happened. "I know what you did, Jacob," I said softly. "Linda found the accounts. She showed me everything, the gambling, the withdrawals. Every time I thought I was helping your family, you were using me." He jerked back in his chair, color draining from his face. For a moment, he tried to bluster, to summon that old confidence. "You think you know everything? You don't understand what it's like, trying to provide, trying to keep it together. You have no idea what I went through." "I know what I went through," I replied, still calm. "I spent years carrying you, saying yes every time, believing it would make things better. But you lied to all of us. You let us believe you were the victim. You let us believe you deserved more, when you were just taking." He let out a bitter laugh, eyes darting around the empty room. "So what? You're perfect? You never made a mistake? You're not a saint, Emily. Don't act like you are." "I'm not a saint," I said. "But I'm done being your crutch. You used me, Jacob. I forgive you. But I won't forget." He shook his head, anger bubbling up, the last weapon he had left. "You think you're strong now, huh? Think you're better off without family? You'll regret this. One day, you'll realize what you lost." I stood, gathering my things slowly, deliberately. "I haven't lost anything I ever really had," I said quietly. "And I'm not angry anymore. Just done." I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard his chair scrape back, his voice echoing louder, desperate to fill the space I was leaving behind. "You'll regret this, Emily. You'll see." But I kept walking, the words trailing after me, lighter with every step. Outside, the rain had let up, leaving the world washed clean. I breathed in deeply, letting the air settle into my lungs. My heart was steady. There was no triumph, only a quiet release, the knowledge that I'd finally closed a chapter, not with a bang, but with the gentle click of a library door behind me. Easter morning dawned bright and cool, the kind of Portland spring that promises renewal even before you step out of bed. I lingered under the covers a little longer than usual, savoring the light spilling through the curtains. There was a familiar ache, a memory of past Easters spent bustling in kitchens, making deviled eggs while holding back tears, watching family laughter from the edge of someone else's table. But this year, as I sat up and looked around my quiet apartment, I didn't feel empty. If anything, I felt light. The brunch table was smaller now, just a neat place setting for one. I dressed it up with a bunch of cheap daisies and a pair of painted eggs from last year's craft box. The plates were mismatched, the napkins folded more out of habit than necessity. I made a spinach quiche the night before, its golden crust filling the apartment with warmth. Orange juice in a mason jar, a pot of coffee, and a plate of sliced strawberries. Simple, but it was all for me, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. I set my phone on a stand at the center of the table, the sunlight making the screen gleam. Linda had texted the night before, asking if I'd be up for a video call with the boys after brunch. "They made you something," she wrote, followed by a line of bunny and chick emojis. I smiled, imagining what little hands might create in a new home with fresh hope. After brunch, 2 slices of quiche and a second cup of coffee later, I wiped my hands, straightened my hair, and called Linda. The screen filled with their faces almost instantly, Linda, looking tired but happy, and the boys, each holding up construction paper signs that read Happy Easter, Auntie M, in lopsided letters. In the background, I caught glimpses of their new rooms, poster beds with bright sheets, sunlight pouring in through windows that faced the Colorado plains. "Look what we made," the younger one shouted, thrusting his sign so close that all I could see was a blur of green marker. Linda laughed, pulling him back gently. "Happy Easter, guys. The signs are perfect." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. They showed me their baskets, plastic eggs filled with candy, a chocolate bunny already missing an ear. Linda told me about their new neighborhood, the little park around the corner, the grocery store where they'd found a favorite cereal. There was a sense of ease in her voice that I hadn't heard in years, like she could finally exhale without fear of what might follow. We chatted about small things, school projects, lost teeth, what they wanted to do this summer. The boys argued over which mountain they'd hike first. Linda rolled her eyes in mock exasperation, but there was laughter beneath it, something soft and bright. At one point, the youngest asked, "Can you come visit, Auntie Em? We have a pool now." Linda smiled, promising we'd figure out the details. After the call, I left the phone propped up and let the silence settle in around me. It was the kind of quiet that feels earned, the hush after a long storm. I glanced at the Easter eggs and smiled, remembering last year, how I'd made deviled eggs while crying over the kitchen sink, wishing for a family that felt like home. This year, even though the table was emptier, my heart wasn't. I felt the truth of it as I cleaned up the dishes, humming to myself, sunlight warming my back. I thought about all the years I'd spent pouring myself into other people's lives, trying to earn a place at the table. I'd never imagined that family could look like a phone balanced among coffee cups and leftover decorations, but there it was, laughter through a screen, promises for summer, children's voices weaving new memories. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up the phone again. "Let's make this a tradition," I texted Linda, fingers tapping out the words before I could overthink them. "Brunch, calls, Easter crafts. No more tears in the deviled eggs." Her reply came a minute later, "The kids want to know if they can visit for 4th of July. I laughed, the sound echoing through the apartment. "Tell them I'll stock up on fireworks and marshmallows," I wrote back, "and they can help me decorate the balcony." There was still so much to sort out, so much healing left to do. But as I looked around at my little apartment, the sunlight, the scent of quiche, the sound of laughter lingering in my ears, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. Easter had always been about rebirth, about hope after hardship. This year, it belonged to me, too. They called me a loser. Jacob said it on the porch that day, with all the conviction of someone who thought he'd won. Sometimes, I think my parents agreed, maybe not in words, but in the way they closed ranks around him, in the silences that followed my departure, in the cards that never arrived and the calls that never came. For a while, I let that word shape the edges of my world. I wore it like a bruise, tender and hidden, afraid to touch it for fear it might never fade. But today, as I sit in the shade of a wide old maple at Grant Park, a light summer breeze moving the pages of my journal, I realize I've finally lost them. Lost the need for their approval, the ache for a place at their table, the old hope that if I tried just a little harder, I'd belong. The world is bright and green around me, families picnicking on blankets, kids weaving between trees, chasing bubbles and kites. The sun filters through the branches and scattered coins of gold. I hear the hum of laughter, the call of a dog, the steady rush of the city on the other side of the park fence. I turn a page in my notebook, pen poised above a fresh sheet, and breathe. Jacob still sends emails sometimes. They show up in my inbox with subject lines like "you owe me" or "you can still fix this." I don't open them. I don't reply. I let them pile up, unread, like invitations to a life I no longer have any interest in living. It took me a long time to understand that his anger isn't my burden to carry. My parents haven't called. There was a time, not so long ago, when that silence would have hollowed me out. Now, it feels oddly gentle, like the hush after a storm, when the air is finally clear. I don't know what they say about me to friends or at church. I don't know if they regret what happened, or if they simply moved on, comfortable in a story where I'm the one who left. I've made my peace with not knowing. Linda and the boys are thriving. We text often, photos of their hikes, the boys in swim goggles, Linda grinning beside a garden she's coaxed from rocky Colorado soil. Sometimes we call and just let the conversation meander, recipes, school projects, silly jokes. The 4th of July visit is already on the calendar, and I've started collecting sparklers and sidewalk chalk, planning a menu the boys will love. A shout draws my attention. A little girl, maybe 4 or 5, tumbles on the grass in front of me, her knees skidding on the sun-warmed dirt. She sits up, blinking, surprise more than pain on her face. I close my journal and go to her, kneeling down at her level. "Hey there," I say, voice soft. "Are you okay?" She nods, a little shy, but her eyes are bright. Her mother jogs over, breathless but smiling. "Thank you," she says, scooping her daughter up in a warm hug. I nod, wave, and return to my spot under the tree. Simple kindness. Nothing owed, nothing expected. Just a moment shared, two strangers in a park, the world spinning gently on. Back on my blanket, I open my journal and write, kindness without boundaries turns into sacrifice. I've learned to choose love, with limits. It's not a lesson I wanted, but it's one I needed. The pages before this one are full of doubts, lists, tallies, late-night reckonings. But today, my handwriting is steadier, looping and sure. I write about the old ache, about the ways I tried to fill it, with gifts, with work, with second chances. I write about Linda's courage, about the boys' laughter through a phone screen, about the bright clean space that has opened inside me now that I've stopped chasing what was never mine. I write about the quiet rituals of self-care, a solo brunch, a walk in the park, the gentle, forgiving company of my own thoughts. The wind lifts a strand of hair from my cheek and rustles the leaves overhead. I pause, eyes closed, letting the peace of the moment soak in. There's no cliffhanger here, no sharp twist waiting on the next page. Just the steady pulse of acceptance, the slow rebuilding of a life with room to breathe. I used to think being a loser meant failing some unspoken test, not measuring up in the eyes of the people I loved. But losing isn't always about what's taken from you. Sometimes, it's about what you finally let go. I let go of their judgments, their expectations, their narrow definitions of what it means to belong. I let go of the guilt, the resentment, the need to explain myself again and again. I let go of the hope that one more gift, one more act of generosity, would ever be enough. In that letting go, I found something I hadn't known I was missing, peace. It settles into me now, deep and abiding, as sure as the shade beneath this tree. A group of children race by, their laughter echoing across the grass. I watch them go, smiling, and for the first time in a long time, I feel the fullness of summer, possibility and warmth, a future that's entirely my own. Sitting under that old maple tree, I realize true peace comes not from holding on, but from letting go with love. Through loss and forgiveness, I learned that kindness must have boundaries, only then can it truly heal both giver and receiver. In the end, family is not just blood, but those who honor your heart and respect your limits. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll share your thoughts or your own journey with someone you trust. Sometimes, just by listening and caring, we give each other a place to belong.